Hi, good evening, everyone. If you are in the Singapore or Hong Kong time zone, welcome to the Futureproofing Your Career series. Thank you for joining Kevin and I today here. Why we're here today, it's really about, we would like to learn about what kind of changes are coming along with all this AI buzz, right? So thank you so much, Kevin, for coming here. And I'm really excited for this opportunity to talk with you what's happening in the world and how we can manage our career in this changing world. Um, I am a strong believer and a career coach. I believe in agile philosophy. So if the situation changes, we need to change, right? So I think right now the situation calls for reflection and also how we can pivot for our career strategy. And that's why today I want to learn about what's your take of all this change that has to come and that has already and we can, discuss and explore how we can devise a different strategy for our career so we can be resilient in the future. So today's structure is that two of us, Kevin and I, will spend about 40 to 45 minutes, depending on you, right? How many questions you have, if you pop up, questions in that Q&A section. So we are going to see the questions, and if there are a lot of questions, we will cut our conversation a little short, and we'll move on to address your questions, so we can have a conversation there. So that's about, that 1 hour, 40 minutes conversation and about 20 minutes opening to the floor. So Kevin, I think we met about exactly 10 years ago, 2014, when we were doing the MBA at INSEAD. And I think I remember you were still in private banking and then you later pivoted and joined startup world in Myanmar. So that one of the interesting stuff. I can't wait to really unpack that and learning from that very, very colorful experience as well. So let's do just a very quick introduction. For myself, I'm Yolanda Yu. I am a career and leadership coach. I have worked in the tech industry for 20 years, was as a programmer and later in business and sales roles. I worked in fintech and e-commerce industries. And Kevin Pereira is the managing director at Blu Artificial Intelligence. So I would like to hand over to Kevin to make a self introduction and help us to understand his world and what he sees.
Sure. Thanks, Yolanda. And it's crazy to think it's 10 years, but time definitely flies. So welcome everyone. Glad to be here tonight. So by way of really quick introduction, so I was born and raised in Hong Kong, spent a bunch of time here. I did my undergrad in the US and then went, as Yolanda said, to work in private banking, a city in New York. Did that for about 6 years. Enjoyed the job, but I think at the same time at some point to move back to Asia and I wanted to try something a little bit different. So that was really the motivation for going to INSEAD. So I went to INSEAD, and post INSEAD, I promised myself two things. So number one, I wanted to change from finance, and number two, I wanted a little bit of an adventure. So my first job after INSEAD was working in Myanmar, where I was doing internet infrastructure. So basically anything that makes your phone work, we were building. So fiber optic in the ground, cell towers, data centers. And I think one of the interesting parts about that is I got to see how technology impacts people's lives, especially in a very frontier market like Myanmar. You really get to see that impact. So it's pretty cool. And if people have any questions about that, more than happy to answer that. Post Myanmar, I came back to Hong Kong, and I was thinking about what I wanted to do. And I met an INSEAD alum actually in Hong Kong who had been working in artificial intelligence. And he said, "Hey, I'm opening my own consulting shop. Would you like to join?" I joined him, and yeah, it's been about 7 years. So that's the real quick introduction there.
Wow, yeah, that's a lot to unpack, and I'm really curious about the Myanmar part as well. Later, if we get time, we can get into that. So I think maybe share with us a bit, Kevin, what you do today. So exactly right. So is it that do you do invent robots or do you talk to humans about yeah about all this
Sure.
stuff? Mm.
Yeah. So basically on the consulting side, right, what we really do, so my company is called Blu Artificial Intelligence, and we do AI consulting and also AI education. And when we started about 7 years ago, we thought it would be all about implementation and, like you said, right, like making the robots. I think we very quickly realized after about 3 months that just because you have artificial intelligence in the name of the company doesn't mean people will come running. And if anything, when we asked around, a lot of people said that when they think about AI, they feel either fear or confusion, right? And I think fear, we can get into it a lot, but I think the confusion is that there's a lot of math that underlies AI, and there's also a lot of technical jargon. So that's a barrier for a lot of people with AI. And then also and there's also a lot of fear, right? And that also comes from many places, which we can unpack later. But I think the only way you address fear and confusion is actually through education. So in addition to the consulting work that we do, we also do a lot of education. And I say the education is partly for corporations that want to educate their employees and people about AI. And then also we do a lot of work in academia because a few of the universities in Hong Kong, initially back in 2018, asked me to do a few talks about AI. And that eventually morphed into full credit classes for MBAs, master's students, and undergrads as well. So I have a lot of views on AI and education, which we can certainly discuss in the Q&A too. But we do a lot of education within academia. So I'm an adjunct professor. So what that means is I'm not like the typical professor that does a lot of research, but I'm more there for teaching, and I have also one foot in the industry as well. So I come to the education area from a slightly different angle. So to summarize, Blue, we do AI consulting and AI education, and the education is on one side corporate and one side academic.
I'm really curious about the fear. Just that the fear is coming from a lot of places. So my hypothesis is that we tend to have fear when something we don't understand that's coming. And when something, there are a lot of those theories, a lot of the warnings about, they are so powerful, they can wipe us all out. So I wonder if that's what you're referring to, or are there more nuances around those fears?
Yeah, so I would say the sources of fear. Maybe we can start with that one. So I think one of the sources of fear is definitely Hollywood, right? So any movies with AI in it tends to end up badly for the human beings, right? Just think Terminator, Skynet, Her, the newest Mission Impossible movie. I can keep going on and on. But I think when people see these types of themes, i.e., like bad for humans, if that theme is reinforced for 15 to 20 years, people start to build very strong negative associations. So I think Hollywood and maybe even sci-fi to a certain extent has added a component of fear there. So I think that's one part of it. And then the second part of the fear, I think, is that a lot of people are afraid that AI is going to come and take away their job, right? So, you kind of see that a lot with the media, sensationalist headlines. So there's a bunch of, there's, I think, two main forces there that are really contributing a lot to the fear. And, I think to a certain extent, people can get over the movie stuff, but the jobs part tends to hit quite close to home for many people. And so that's why I think many folks are concerned at sort of how, that's coming to the reality now.
Yeah, I think that feels really real, right? Like if AI can do my job, like even I was gonna, it's real for me too, right? I sometimes consult ChatGPT, and then what if that it comes that people don't need coaches anymore? People just go to the ChatGPT and say, I have this problem with my boss, what do I do? Or I am in this place in my career, and then I want to be elsewhere, what do I do? Thankfully, today, of course, I see it's still a lot more generic kind of response from ChatGPT, but it does make me think that, that percentage that we can rely on such intelligence will just keep growing. And we as humans, how do we kind of stay relevant in the times in today?
And Yolanda, I think in addition to just like purely do I have a job or not, I think there is a one level deeper component there, which is what is my self-worth, right? Because I think a lot of people tie their self-esteem and self-worth to their job. And I'm not saying it's a bad or good thing, it's just an observation that I see a lot of people doing. And so if you ultimately do that, then if an AI comes in and takes that away, that's also very scary from a psychological perspective as well. Right? So I do think, and we'll probably get into different mentality shifts that we need. But I think one of them is that, this idea that I am only worth as much as the quality of my job or the quality of my work output. I think that's something that we need to focus in a bit to maybe move away from a little, because I think that that association could have been strong previously. But now with AI coming in, I think there's going to be a few changes in the sort of the work systems that we see. And that I think is an association that hopefully we can start to move away from a bit.
But that's really interesting. So they actually walk away from that system where we kind of take our wants and values from our work. And now we can say, oh, well, AI is doing the job. AI is doing the work, right? So my want is elsewhere, so something else. But how would that be possible? How do you think that might work?
Sure. So, there's plenty of frameworks. I mean, I get asked about this in academia and corporates as well. So I think maybe I can start with like some of my thinking right on this. And I
Yeah.
think the way we're going to see some of these work systems change is that I don't think it's really about job automation per se, but I think it's more about task automation, right? So for people on the call,
What? I'm sorry.
about task automation. So TASK, task automation.
Mhm.
So the framework I'd like to encourage people to think about is that every job consists of certain tasks. Some of them are easy to automate and some of them are hard to automate. Right. So I think in the future, what's going to happen is AI is going to come in and take away the easy to automate stuff, leaving us with the hard to automate things to do. Right.
Mhm.
And so I think the way existing jobs will evolve is that we are going to see the human beings left with the hard to automate stuff. And if, let's say, there's a hypothetical job with 10 tasks, and if seven of them are easy to automate, then the evolution of their job is going to be, or the question I should say, is going to be, do we let the human being do the remaining three tasks, or do we add new tasks into that job? Right. And I think that's the way we're going to see evolution happen. So I'm encouraged by that because a lot of the things that are easy to automate are also boring in terms of uh, tasks that are in a job. So I actually think if the AI comes in and takes away the boring stuff that you do, and you're left with the more in like fun things, then I think that's a very positive change. Right. Like if I real quick maybe provide a little bit of context. I used to be a private banker, right? The fun part about the private banking job is you get out, you meet people, you build those relationships and trust. One of the painful parts of the job is like admin and paperwork, right? You go talk to a lot of private bankers, I think they'll share the same sentiment. So if you tell a private banker, you can now have more time to meet clients and you don't have to worry about any of the paperwork, you'll end up bite your hand off for that situation. Right? So I think that's the way I encourage people to think about how work systems are going to change. Don't think of it as job automation. Think of it as task automation. Now, if in your job, 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10 tasks can be automated, then that's an area of concern, right? So we should keep in mind what's the relative proportion. But I think that's the right way to look at this stuff as opposed to just have blind fear that, oh my God, tomorrow I'm not going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I like this picture you're painting here, right? And that really kind of reminds me of quite a few coaching conversations I have. And you're right, we tend to build our value of how competent we are when we are doing our work. And then when we, don't do well, sometimes there's that ego suffers and an attack, right? And then at the same time, we do take refuge in then kind of doing things. Sometimes I've seen leaders even, sometimes they feel like, I don't want to tackle things is stuff. I just want to get things done. In the sense that we are hiding in getting things done instead of really coming out and say, okay, that getting things done is being handled. And now my responsibility is to be able to think, to see differently, to be creative, and to be solving some real challenges that we can see. I think that's where it actually allows us to take more agency that we are just happy and kind of entertaining ourselves and say, I've got a lot of things done. It's not about the task.
Yeah, I mean, I just think being busy for the sake of being busy is a bad idea. I think if you are, let's say you work maybe 75% of the time, but you really were thinking about the issues, you're really adding a lot of value, I actually think that's not a bad thing, right? And if the busy work, if it goes away, we are given more free time, A, like you said, to do high value tasks, but B, also to do our, pursuits of, hobbies or things that you enjoy, things that you like. My sense is, people probably become happier with that. Right. Again, that's just my
And
theory. We'll
do
see,
you,
but I think that's the way it goes.
do you think it's actually possible we all that should just work for 4 hours a day in a week?
So Yolanda, and I appreciate you asking the question, right? So whenever I think about these things, I always look at human history, right? And if you kind of look back to when they first invented the computer, right? And maybe let's take a certain specific job. So let's say something like investment banking, right? Where people are working quite hard. And I think what you find is once the computer got kind of included in their work streams, they actually started working longer, right? So they were becoming more productive, but at the same time, they were working for longer and at a higher productivity rate. So I think just because we have productive tools doesn't necessarily mean we work less, right? So I think that's not necessarily a standard assumption you can make. But so I think we need to keep in mind, right? Productive tools will only result in more free time if we, I think, make a conscious effort to do that. And we as both human beings, like employees, but we could also be organizations as well, right? So I think it's not just the human making the decision about that. I think there's an organizational culture piece that I think also matters.
Yeah, I think if we look at it that way, then there's a lot of benefits because in the sense that everyone is like technology hasn't really improved our well-being, kind of bind us to the screens, and the technology further evolves. If there is a chance for us to kind of be liberated, right, a little bit more, and having a shorter work week and more life, that's something that definitely we'll look forward to. And so, Chanel, I think the other part in terms of what that task of automation, and the other part is about how would organization actually look different? How would what is in structured differently, but also how people will be structured differently, right? And what kind of culture or leadership that you think in this future world that how would that be like?
Sure. So I think there'll be a few changes if we follow the task automation thing I was talking about before. I think there will definitely be some changes alongside function, right? So there are certain functions, for example, that have easier to automate tasks there, and that then I think changes the nature of some of those jobs. Okay. So let's, for example, just take a marketing. I think that's probably a good one, right? So what you see with a lot of AI now is that in the last sort of 1.5, 2 years, we've seen the rise of what we call generative AI, right? And generative AI means that AI is now creating content, but from the stand of the word generating content. And we never had that type of AI before. Like previously, before Gen AI, it was all about computers and AI looking at existing data that was already there and then coming to conclusions based on that existing data. The thing about Gen AI is now Gen AI is actually creating stuff, right? And that's a fundamental shift from what we've seen before. So if we take a function, for example, like marketing, right? One aspect of marketing is creating a lot of content. So it could be creating copy, it could be articles. There's a lot of things that happen sort of in the marketing space. And so I think what happens there is the shift, right, from the human being. It moves from one of content creation to content editing, right? So now what it means is AI takes the first crack at doing something, and then we as the human beings then take what the AI is producing and adding our own spin to it, right? And that spin could be you take the output and you physically make the changes, or the spin could be in the prompt when you are prompting and using Gen AI, you can say, make this a little bit more empathetic or add more humor, right? But I still think that it's still the human being doing the content editing. It's just that sometimes you'll take the words and change them yourselves. Other times you encourage the AI to change it for you. But I still think the function is moving from content creation to content editing, right? So I think it's very related on which function you're in. And that's why I brought up the framework of task automation before, because I think individual people need to think about their tasks and their jobs to think about how things are going to change. Because how it's going to change in marketing and how it's going to change in healthcare is going to be very different, right? So I don't want to sit here and say like, oh, every job is going to change because of this, but I want to provide people with ways to think about their job and for them to ascertain how things are changing.
Yeah, I love this, and I think that this made me think about our real job is to solve problems, and that being humans, we do have that privilege, which AI doesn't have, to look at the whole system and then understand why, does this all this job exist and what problem I would like to solve. And that's solving problem-solving management mindset actually enables us to give AI different kind of framing as well, right? So we can ask the AI to, to let's say, to translate something to us and say, hey, can you translate our document for me? Or we can also ask AI to self-correct, or to say, can you train me to do translation? Can you train me to be a better supervisor for AI? So I think that's multiple layers that actually work with AI and knowledge they can here. So it is really like we can ask it to do very basic tasks, or we can give it a lot more of co-creation space and look at how do we solve a problem together.
Yeah, and I definitely second your idea of thinking about it as co-creation, right? So when we do workshops and when I teach my classes, I encourage students to use it as like a thought partner, right? Like you can bounce ideas off, and also when you use Gen AI, you can ask it to explain its reasoning, right? So therefore, you actually get some sense as to what is the logical process it is using to get to the answers, and does that process make sense? Because I think as people, right, if we start to use more AI in our daily jobs and lives, then we also need to become more critical users, right? So our critical thinking, the kind of hat, needs to be on. Because Yolanda, I teach, right? And I encourage my students to use AI. And I worry sometimes about over reliance. Because some students will just literally take what AI says, take it, and then just copy and paste it as their homework, right? And in fact, once or twice, I think students have left like dear in brackets professor's name, right? So they don't even like change that piece of it. They just stick it into an email and send it to me. So, you start to see like some of the perils, right, of over reliance. So I think, the future people who are good at their job are going to be the ones who are good at using these tools both critically at the input level, so being good at like prompting or whatever it is. And I think even prompting eventually will change because we have something called AI agents, which I can talk about a little bit. But basically, there's an input level that the human controls when stuff goes to AI. And then when the AI creates the output, there's also a critical way to look at the output to either improve it or find potential mistakes that are there as well. Right. So I think being a critical user of these tools in the future is really important. And if I summarize kind of my thought there, right, to people kind of who are listening and who might be scared, I actually think that you are more likely to be replaced by someone who knows how to use AI rather than by the AI itself. So if you become good users of these tools, I think that is going to be a really powerful skill growth.
The thought here goes, wouldn't AI tool be like something like Microsoft Windows or Office in the future, like it just becomes by default if you were to work in a corporate or what anywhere you need to know them? Or are you talking about something a lot more specialized, in terms?
Yes. Yeah, great question. Right. So I think right now, like things like ChatGPT are very generalized tools. Right. So whether you work in a healthcare hospital, let's say, or whether you work in finance, people may still use, let's say, GPT-4. But I think in the future, we will probably see much more specialized tools. That's kind of my sense, because it's very hard to create this model or this AI model that can do everything. I think generally what we see previous to ChatGPT is most AI was what we call narrow AI, meaning that it does a few tasks very, very well. And why narrow AI is kind of, I think, maybe more likely what we're going to see in the future is because when companies build these things, they're actually very expensive to build. Like if you just try and go replicate a ChatGPT, it's going to cost you millions, if not tens, if not hundreds of millions, right? So the development cost is very high. So if new companies start to make very specialized tools, then they might only use training data from one industry or one area, which dramatically lowers the cost, but also means that the tool becomes more specialized. So I think there's kind of two schools of thought. One is we're going to have the omnipotent AI that can do everything. And there's another school of thought that says it's too hard to build many omnipotent AIs. So let's just build these specialized sort of tools that are relevant for specific industries. If I had to bet, I would probably say the specialized tools is more what we're leaning towards. But the growth in AI is exponential. So if there's one thing I've learned by working in AI for 7 years, is try not to predict what AI is going to do because it can definitely exceed expectations or have very different outcomes to your expectation.
Yeah, and that really made me think, we are talking about co-creation with AI. We are talking about our relationship, and actually, the topic of our talk today is about how to fall in love. I know some people had a misunderstanding about things about relationship, but it is about a relationship with AI, right? But the thing is, maybe at collective level, humans and AI are equal partners. But at individual level, each individual of us is not match of AI, right? As you said, this is it's completely beyond our imagination. And this wisdom is beyond us. Beyond isn't mean no more than the AI. Perhaps there are just a few things there. So I'm just, thinking this is such a imbalanced kind of relationship. How can you even have a relationship if that guy is so much more powerful than you?
So Yolanda, I kind of disagree a little bit with the premise, right? So I don't think it's necessarily that the AI is better than us at everything, but it is better at different things, right? And if we use the analogy of relationships, right? Like even if you look at relationships between people, different people often tend to be good at different things. Right. So some of the relationships that work well are often between people who, let's say, are good at A and bad at B. And the other side of the relationship is are bad at A and good at B. Right. So why does it kind of work out is because people have different complementary strengths and weaknesses. And I actually think that same model is applicable also to AI as well. Right. I think often when we think of AI as being able to come up with any answer very quickly, right? That is often seen as like maybe a proxy for wisdom, right? But if you actually look at some of the answers, right, that AI provides, in the industry, we're very worried about something called hallucinations, which is basically when the AI actually makes up answers, right? And people who are listening might not be familiar with like why hallucinations happen. So really quickly, right, when these what we call large language models, so ChatGPT and a bunch of these other things, we refer to them as LLMs or large language models. And perhaps when you use them, you may feel like it's a human being on the other side or something human-like. But the truth is, these models just crunch a lot of math to predict the next word in the sentence or in the paragraph that it's created. And the reason why they become so human-like is because they become very good at the prediction of that next word. Okay, so if people are sitting there thinking that these large language models have a soul, are alive, absolutely not true. They're just really good at figuring out the next word when given context, right? So given a sentence, given a paragraph, or given a question that you are asking. Okay. So these large language models are purely crunching that math. And so sometimes they get that wrong, right? Yeah, nothing is perfect. So AI also sometimes gets that prediction of the next word wrong. And that's why I think we need a human being sitting with the AI to see some of those hallucinations and prevent that from, being published or, going to the next stage. So I don't actually think it's AI is, was much more powerful than all of us. I think we need to see it more as like a complementary angle where it's the AI and the human working together. Just like in a human relationship, it's human A and human B working together to get the best outcome.
Thanks. So as you talked, I was imagining AI is like, in a love relationship, it's like the person who's a genius, right? With a lot of intelligence, really fast thinker. But then at times actually can come up with nonsense.
Maybe drunk genius may be the way to go, right?
Genius, yeah, possible. But then on the other hand, it's like to be a partner with such a person, and then there's this part just needs to always stay awake and alert. To do novel things, right? Because we do use those intelligence, but at the same time, it's very dangerous. So actually, it reminds me of the story of this Spanish who is a Soviet officer who I think back in 1983, the year I was born, he spotted some nuclear attack from the United States, and all the systems were telling him it's nuclear, and then you need to counterattack with nuclear. So if he did that, then our world today may not be this, right? Like they will start to this indeed back and forth during a few nuclear bombs and they're all gone by then. But he decided that the system is doing a false alone. And that was really genius in that moment. I just can't imagine. What I met was like just a few sentence, and he decided knowledge is done. Because if it was the US, it would have been much more massive than just a few missiles. And all the systems were like counterattack, and it just shut them off. So I think that was for me, it's such a powerful story of how humans and intuitions can be so powerful at that moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I think, that's a great example of, the human and the AI, kind of working together. And there are going to be times when the AI says do A and the human judgment needs to be like, does this really make sense? And you'd be
Yeah.
surprised. You learn that how hard it is to program human common sense into AI. It's just really, really difficult. Really, really difficult.
There's a recent example quite funny. Recently there was a lot of eclipse in the US, and right, most people weren't sure. So it was quite funny. All the hotels, if you can imagine, in all the cities, the hotels that you can see in solar eclipse, their rates went down a lot. It's just popular. But Airbnb, their algorithm didn't pick up that. So Airbnb rates stayed flat, which means they really needs a huge opportunity for surcharge. And I'm sure after this, the AI would learn shooting up groups these special similar phenomenon. But till then, they didn't know. They didn't know what has not happened, that they was not aware of patterns like this.
So that's what, you're yeah, I was just gonna say, that's why when you were talking earlier about organizations and leaders, right? I think this idea of data-driven decision making is helpful, but we should also at the same time not be over-reliant on the AI.
Exactly. This is what helped. Didn't need the big data. They were like, there are gonna be more only less reason, right? That's it.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's why, there's data-driven, there's use AI, but there's also room for human judgment. And this is something I think a lot of people who are afraid of AI taking their job, I think this is the bit where we need to look within our jobs and where is there elements of human judgment and become better at those so that we become a better complement to the AI.
Tell me a bit more about, our strength, how we can be a better complement.
Sure. So I talked about this from the perspective of having worked in AI and knowing what's difficult to put together, right? In terms of the AI capability. So if I think about, let's say maybe one category that often jumps out at me as hard to automate, I think that one category is often things related to human interaction. Right? It's really difficult. So things like empathy, trust building, storytelling, for example. I know people might say ChatGPT can write stories. That's fine, but you still need a human being to prompt it in the right way to write the correct story for the right situation, right? So maybe the skill itself changes a bit, but I think you need a human being there. And I think those, like again, trust building, uh, storytelling, etc. I think they are very human orientated skills that we need to get better at as just people overall. And I think sometimes when we see like education systems that are maybe pushing like hard skills, for example, I do think that that emphasis on hard skills probably has to lessen a little bit because AI from a task perspective can do a lot of the hard skill stuff. Whereas I think for the soft skill pieces, that's a lot more difficult. So actually, I don't know which classes, Yolanda, you took at INSEAD, but when I was there, I tried to take a lot of the soft skill classes. So I focused on things like career dynamics and self-assessment, psychological issues and management. I mean, those are just two titles that pop up. But I wanted to take more courses there because I think those for me were personally more interesting. When I was at INSEAD, like you said, I didn't know I was going to be an AI, but I happened to find those topics and subjects much more interesting. And I think, I've been a little bit lucky that the interest was also an area that's hard to automate. So that's more by luck than skill. But I do think that if people now start to concentrate some of their personal development in those areas, I think that's going to be a good thing, right? Now, the one caveat I also have with that is your listeners here may go and learn all the skills I mentioned. And 5 years down the line, they may meet me somewhere and say, Kevin, despite me learning all the skills you mentioned, I still got fired. Why did that happen? Right. And I think the important caveat to realize is that AI's progress is what we call exponential, meaning it doesn't improve at the same rate generally at the beginning, it's much slower. So it doesn't look as though it's going to be that good. And then eventually it gets really good really fast, right? So I say that caveat because what is hard to automate today might also become easy to automate tomorrow, right? So that we need to keep in mind. And I think because of that, the biggest kind of sort of mindset change that I think people need to have is to implement a culture of continuous learning. Because again, if AI starts to get better at different things, then in the future, we as human beings need to continuously develop as well. Right. So you're asking me kind of like what should we think about and how should we go about skill development? I think just creating like a culture of continuous learning. And the way I see it, it's almost a muscle, right? So if you don't use it in a long time, and then you go to the gym after like 5 years, like it's gonna hurt, right? When you first get there. And so I think continuous learning is exactly the same thing. And what I find is if you start to continuously learn, then if something new pops up and you're forced to learn new things, it's not that scary because you've been learning for a long time, right? I think that's why in school we're so much better at learning new things because you've just been learning new things at school continuously. Like I think if you go talk to, let's say, INSEAD MBA students, as an example, and you're like, hey, here's a new concept, they'd be like, all right, let's talk about it. Whereas if you talk to someone who's not really learned something for like 10 or 15 years, and then you say, hey, let's learn something new, there's probably more initial resistance. And I think that is purely because continuous learning, like I say, is like a muscle. So my encouragement is to people, build it if it's not there. And if it's there, continue to keep using it because I think it's really important.
Yeah, I'm so glad you bring up this topic on continuous learning, right? I think there's a hard compact is our childhood education system to be responsible that we were somehow given this idea that after you graduate, after you start working, you don't need to learn anymore. But that is still not true, right? So today I kind of always tell my daughter, I'm going to that class, they'll do that in that time. And then what they just, but you always go to schools. I said, yeah, we need to always go to school. So I am, trying to make her saying this natural. Like it doesn't end from school. But there's one thing I also learned in recent years that is about learning how to learn. Because one thing, when we especially, do in universities or in the more formal kind of education system is to learn skills, and we learn through. I think even like INSEAD did a lot of experiment, right? Like experiential learning. But there are still a lot of other ways. It's about how am I learning something, right? So sometimes we might be in a much more fancy world, like we take let's say leadership, right? We can learn through theory, we can learn through role model, we can learn through practicing. But then sometimes our way of learning may not really fit that subject better at the current moment. So it requires us to kind of learn how we are learning. And then we change our operating system and learn differently. So one example is when I was learning coaching. Initially, I was like, okay, let me take all the textbook, let me listen to the teacher series, and I'll practice a lot. But I realized, no, that doesn't work because if I understood the principle wrongly, I practice, the more I practice, the worse, right? And we learned that was true embodiment. So in that space, it's about, I can't learn just with my brain. I have to learn with my body. And I think that is a key difference of humans and AI. Because we have a body. Because a lot of times, let's say if I work with, leaders in leadership, and they say, I want to create a more trusted environment. And that's space. And that's something they need to embody. So that when people approach them, before they say anything, that presence will already communicate somewhat related signal, somewhat trusting signal. And, so it's not about just we learn how to think, how to do things, but we need to learn the other parts of our whole being as well, right? And I think then going back to your point on empathy, our connection, it's a little bit by that felt sense. Not just, I come to you and I calculate how much does baby know and how much I trust him. But I see you. Yeah, and I know.
Yeah, and to maybe add a bit more on that, right, in terms of a concrete example. So a lot of the workshops that we do are with like leadership teams from these large corporations, right? And what you tend to find is in the workshops that I do, I actually force them to use the AI tools, right? Because I think, Yolanda, if they go back to their employees and say, hey, you guys should use these tools, but they've never used the tools themselves, that message will not be genuine, right? Whereas if they come to the workshop, I literally force them to use the tools, right? I'm like, come up with a prompt. Here's a task. And what we're going to do is we're going to take your responses, put it into the image generator, right? So something like Midjourney, which creates very high quality images. And then we talk about it. And not in a way where your prompt is bad, your prompt is good. But hey, this is what I liked about it. And this is how we could do it different. And the crazy part, Yolanda, is what you find is, after the sessions, we often have like a WhatsApp group or an email chain. And these, let's call them older senior business leaders, start to put in those chat groups things they're creating themselves using AI. It's like, oh, I just recreated this like house in the French Alps. And then that I think ends up providing an incentive to other people to try it themselves. Right. So then once everybody tries it, they realize that a lot of these tools are quite easy to use. And in many cases with these AI tools, we call them no code or low code tools, which means that you don't need programming or coding to use them. And so therefore they're much more accessible, right, to everybody. So my kind of take on education at the corporate level is try to give business leaders in these workshops the chance to use these tools. And once they see how easy it is to use and how much it can be helpful, then when they give this message back to their employees and their audience, the message itself will resonate more because A, they believe it, right? And then B, they've also used it so they can actually show some of their people how to use these tools and what can be done. So I completely agree with you. And I think we try to manifest this idea in the workshops and the education work that we do with companies.
That is easy, but you let them experience that first. There's so when I speak with the CTNs levels, and a lot of them are saying, I am so passionate about AI, but I feel my organization, my employees are yet to catch up with that, right? So I think what John doing is extremely helpful is for maybe they're one now or that even themselves to really experience it and they start to bring that passion out of the other people. Yeah. So I just want to do a time check. So right now it's 7:45. Have to the audience there if you have any additional questions. So I think there are a number of questions already in the Q&A. We will go through some of them. But if you have some really urgent top of mind questions, please pop them in and we are going to prioritize those questions as well. Okay, so should we go into one of the questions, or Kevin, do you feel
Let's do it.
what you are learning collecting to? You want to just give us a bit more on that?
Let's do Q&A. I think it'll be relevant because I want to hear what people are thinking, and I'm happy to address kind of the issues that they want to touch.
All right, yeah. So I think there's one question that what role is it a growth hotspots in the coming years?
Okay. Yeah. So that's an interesting one, right? So let me take that from the perspective of I'd say industries, right? So if I think about not just Gen AI, but AI overall, I think the way to think about where the opportunities are going to be from an AI perspective is to think about where are there going to be industries with large amounts of business model transformation, and then does AI help that business model transformation, right? And I'd say lastly that if you see business model transformation happening, you're excited and passionate about that area, that might be an interesting hotspot for you to think about. So let's take an example, and I'll be a bit selfish here, right? So I'm going to pick an area of AI that I'm very excited. So one of the areas that I think is pretty interesting is an area in healthcare that a lot of companies are looking at called preventative healthcare. So the idea is right now, healthcare is typically reactive, right? So you get sick, you go to the hospital. But what if in the future we could look at data about Yolanda and then we could predict, with let's say a high level of accuracy, that in 10 years she might get this disease. Okay. And that's not like the gene stuff, right? I mean, the genes could be an input, but maybe we can look at our health, our X-rays, or current data that exists. And so, if the model of healthcare goes from, let's say, reactive, what it is today, to proactive tomorrow, that's actually going to open up a lot of new jobs in the future, right? So we're going to need people who specialize in helping the AI to make a prediction. We are going to need people who are sort of like doctors, but sit with Yolanda and say, Yolanda, I've got some bad news for you. But the bad news is that in 10 years, you might have this. So let's come up with a treatment plan, not like we're giving you medicine today to address a disease you have right now, but how about we do things, maybe lifestyle changes, maybe other things that will decrease the risk of that happening in the future, right? So it's almost like a preventative medicine doctor, right? Which is a completely new job that's never existed before, but will happen in the future. So I guess my point is the framework to identify hotspots would be to see where is business model transformation potentially coming, and then where might AI start to help some of this business model transformation.
Yeah, and I think to combine that with the job, career and coaching framework is that we identify the needs of the world, right? As you said, there will be environment for all this on response. And then we look at where we are, and then we create a link line, which is the reachable for me, that I do have some background in certain domain. So let's say healthcare and logistics are both going to be the hotspot, but my background is in maybe retail. Then logistics would be kind of a closer link for me. And then the next one is to look at, do I really have passion? Do I have a course to go towards this, right? If my course is really towards doing something that it has, impact on people's day-to-day lives. And then I see, okay, there's another, maybe lesser hotspot, but it's also great about things that is that I'm touching, every day. And that's where I can add value. That's what I'm quite passionate about. And I think that will be the closest or the shortest path for us to go forward. But it's a great sort of anchor. It's like with what you just suggested, we are blocking of a few key areas, and then we assess where we are, and then we make that career stretch. And the next question is, what new jobs are being created?
Yeah, so a very good one, right? So we talked before about uh, how dollar get involved, right? But whenever we've had large amounts of technology come in, again, looking at human history as a guide, you also create a bunch of new jobs that have never existed before. Okay? So to answer this question, let me take you guys on a little bit of a journey as to what I think a new job might look like. And this is actually partly inspired because I went and gave a talk at my high school recently, right? And I went and gave a talk to the philosophy students. And so the philosophy students were quite interesting. And I remember when I was, younger, I was more thinking about what I'm going to do at break time and, did the cute girl in science class wink at me? But these students are at a completely different level. They are very tuned in. And so what they were saying was historically, philosophy was something that students did if they were bad at like math, science, and all this other stuff. And then eventually they hit the ground at philosophy, right? But in the future, they were saying that, with AI being able to do a lot of the technical hard skills that math, science, and some of those areas offer, in the future, companies might start to hire people who are responsible for thinking about what is the right way to use AI. And that's not right from a technology perspective, but right from a more like social, ethical, those kind of elements, right? And the reason why they thought philosophy students would be a good fit for that is because those types of jobs would typically require the use of moral frameworks, value judgments that philosophy has always been involved in, right? And so their sort of friendly bet with me was that in the future, we'll have a job at these companies called something like an AI ethicist. And that person is, again, like I said, responsible for the right way to use AI. So that would be an example of a new job that never existed before because we didn't have the AI. And now that we do have the AI, companies need to consider that ethical, moral, and value framework. We're actually using the technology going forward. So I thought it was like a fascinating kind of discussion with them, and I appreciated that they were sharing their views there.
Totally, yeah. And I think in the past, we were just wanting to get good at doing something. And not, we really need to get good at thinking about something. And I think basically we need to be no longer just worker. We need to be thought leaders, right? And it's completely possible, right? Like you just imagine all the thought leaders we follow today. They actually are coming from all different kinds of backgrounds. Some of them are professors, some of them are economists, some of them are scientists. But what they have in common is they are thinkers. They are not just stuck in their own little world, but they are able to connect the dots with the other subsystems in the world. And I think this is extremely challenging career prospect. Just imagine if all of us try to become a thought leader. But at the same time, I wonder, going back to your vertical self-worth, uh, wouldn't that be more fulfilling? So yeah, allowing ourselves to really set our eye on something much broader, like the world, instead of just focusing our middle Wall Street. But I think the other aspect was also you talked about Shanghai back, will always love connected. You talk about there's a unique kind of people future needs is where ideally you can both be specialist and also good at working with AI, and I would also take it as also good at thinking. So I wonder if
Yeah.
that's the case, or isn't that specialized in thinking is also a type of specialization?
Sure. So yeah, it's great that you bring that up because I do think that the people who will best use AI in the future are the ones that have domain specific expertise and can also use these tools as well, right? And if we just think about the hallucination thing I talked about before, when AI is making stuff up, right? So if you're a doctor and you look at AI making stuff up, immediately you can tell. Like if the question is healthcare related, you as a domain expert will immediately know that there's a hallucination. Whereas if you're not a doctor and you see the AI giving medical advice, you would be inclined to believe that, even though it may be incorrect. So my view on a lot of that, Yolanda, very much lines up with what you said, which is the best users of the tool are the ones that have a domain expertise and also use the tools. So I think that there are people out there, right, that are worried that AI is going to come and take away their job. One of the other things I'd also say is don't undervalue your experience because that is supremely useful when it comes to using these tools in the right way as well. So I do think that specialists will have for sure a huge role to play, going forward in a lot of these things. And AI will be again the complement to many of them, right? So always think about it from the perspective of augmentation versus substitution. But is the AI there to help or is the AI there to remove? And the truth is, like I said, Yolanda, if you use a framework of task automation, there are going to be some jobs that do get eliminated, right? So I don't want to lie about that. There are definitely some jobs which have a very high percentage of their tasks can be done by an AI. And again, if people want a concrete example, think about a toll booth operator, right? So you drive by a bridge, they collect your money and they put it into a box. That is something that once you have a credit card system that looks at your car and automatically bills you, 100% of that task and that job is gone away, right? So again, it very much comes down to if you're a specialist, if you're adding some value there, then there's a task in that job that is very human focused, and you should be less worried maybe about a job that has more of those.
So there is a very specialized question by our Stanley. How to succeed in the financial services business in a frontier jurisdiction like Cambodia?
Sure. Okay, that's quite a specialized question, but I'm happy to take it anyway.
Or where this question is related to AI actually.
So I think what the person is getting at, right? So I used to work in Myanmar before. Myanmar, I'd say, is a bit more frontier market than Cambodia. But let me kind of share my thought there, right? So basically, when it comes to financial services in Myanmar, Myanmar, at least at the time when I was there, 2015, was a completely cash-based economy, right? So there was no credit cards, very few people had bank accounts, like everything was primarily done in cash, right? So I think Cambodia is a little bit ahead of that, but generally it still tends to be a little bit kind of, from a technology perspective, a little bit behind compared to, let's say, Singapore or Hong Kong. Okay. And I think the way to think about a financial services business is to think about what is the human need that that financial services business is trying to accomplish. Right. So let's say, for example, it's convenience, right? As an example, if you go to the Cambodian sort of consumer and you figure out what is the thing that they are struggling with, then the question is, can you use AI then to address that need? Right? Like the way I define AI to my students and clients is I talk about it as a tool to achieve an objective, right? So if, for example, you find that many people are afraid of carrying that much of cash because they're concerned about security, then something like AI, mobile payments actually makes sense to address that specific need. So I think if I was a financial services company in a place like Myanmar or Cambodia, I think the most important determinant of success is making sure that you address some specific need that the consumer has. And if you use technology or AI to address that in a very efficient or easy sort of user experience way, I think that's a fantastic use of technology. So my personal view is like these emerging markets, if we figure out good technology, they will actually leapfrog a couple of steps in the financial services sort of this in like a stage. So for example, in Myanmar, I think in the future, or maybe let's call it like some of these developing economies, they might skip the whole credit card thing, right, and go directly to mobile payments, right? So I think if they figure out the technology and infrastructure, we might actually see them leapfrog a couple of steps in the financial services sort of historical path that maybe more developed countries have actually looked at. And I think technology will enable that if used to address the human needs that are there.
Yeah, this is a fascinating topic. I mean, I was also in fintech, right? It's really bring up two thoughts here. One is that I agree with you in terms of the leapfrogging, right? Like in Kenya, there where a lot of their mobile wallets weren't just getting ahead, which makes, Visa and MasterCard by the employers quite nervous about that. But on the other hand, I'm wondering how can AI actually play an active role in the market where there are not a lot of financial data, right? And that's why merchant data comes into play. That's why there are a lot of innovation. We try to identify other ways of seeing people's credit history, and whether they're worthy of that transaction and whether they're likely good and defaulting that all that. So in the sense that I think AI has been applied a lot in the two area. One is risk management, two is in the STEM kind of controls fraud domain as well. But the lack of data, I think, has been quite a challenge for insider markets as well. I don't know. That is my outdated, understanding from a couple of years ago. Yeah, and then I think that the thought goes, if we don't have enough data, how would AI actually come in? How can they train? How can they give us those domains?
Yeah, and and just maybe the final to add one final point, if we have data from other nearby countries or nearby markets, sometimes you can also use that as a proxy as well, right? It probably would vary a little bit if the culture was very different, right? But if culture is similar, people's behavior is similar, then you can actually infer some of the correlations in country A and maybe apply them in country B. So that's also another way that financial services who are maybe operating in a country next to Cambodia might then take some of that data or some of that knowledge and then port it into Cambodia. But you need to always be aware of localization and some of the nuances that are there.
Totally. Yeah, I think when we don't have data, we kind of bring some proxy and then we can try to be more creative, right? Yeah. So are we the gods right now? I don't know if the audience have any kind of questions that's still burning. Perhaps I can invite some of them with us from beginning to join us. Not sure if they are okay.
It might be a bit shy, who knows?
Yeah. Okay, so Sham is not so shy. Great. Thanks for joining us. I think I can switch on your video. Or there. Let me see if I can do that.
Well, so Shem, it's really up to you. But if you have a question, you're more than happy. So we're not going to force you if don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Hi. This is Sue here. Thanks very much, both of you. I think it's been fascinating to learn about how AI is, impacting our lives and the ways we can, utilize it properly. Yeah, I think I learned a lot in this session. So basically, I'm just going to thank both of you. It's been a worthwhile session. I've always been, curious about it, and with Chat GPT when it first started, I went and signed up for this course to learn how to prompt your your Chat GPT so that you can get the best answer out of it. Yeah. So I think it's fascinating to see that it's a tool that can help us make life better for a lot of people in our region. So thanks very much to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming up to challenge this and make the evening even more worthwhile. Is there any questions or any thoughts that you would like to talk about before we close the session? Yeah, Dochan, do you have any questions or any thoughts besides the very kind message?
Oh, okay. Yes. I think it's a great combination of both of you. One of you is a coach, and the other one, sort of Kevin, you work in artificial intelligence. So my question is, with AI, do you think that the fear of many people that that it's going, to take away our livelihood and it's going to be used in sort of, in an evil way. I mean, is that something that worries you and keep you up at night? I mean, it's like dynamite, sort of like if you use it for good purposes, right? Or you can use it for war. So is AI that sort of thing? Is there anything in AI that keeps you up at night, worrying? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think it's a really good one. So yeah, if I pick like one area that scares me, it's like the area of autonomous weapons. Like I really worry about that, right? Because if you think about like a fighter jet today, right? A big chunk of what's on the fighter jet is there to keep the pilot alive. But if we move to continuous or complete autonomous weapons, then that space is replaced by more kind of spots for bombs and things like that. So I very much worry at a high level about autonomous weapons. So that's one area of fear. I think on your related kind of to your earlier point, I think when it comes to jobs and the fear that comes there, I guess the thing I'm most concerned about is actually not the long term and the medium term. Because I think in long term and medium term, the job evolution I talked about will happen. And also new jobs will be created. And I think eventually we'll figure out how to retrain our people to address them. Well, what I am concerned though is about the short term, right? And let me explain my view there. Because whenever we've seen huge technology change that affects jobs, normally it happens over a lot longer. So a good example of this is actually when us human beings were working on farms, right? So many people are employed in farming, and then eventually they bring or develop the tractor, right? And the tractor can basically do a ton of what the human beings who are in the fields picking stuff can do. But if you think about a tractor, it still takes 50, 70, 100 years for every farm to get a tractor, right? Because the factory needs to build a tractor, they gotta get all the parts, they gotta figure out all the after sales service, blah, blah, blah. But the difference with generative AI is like overnight, you, me, and grandma can use ChatGPT, right? And I think we've never had that big of a change in that short of a time frame. So that's why I think initially there's going to be a lot of disruption because, like I said, there's going to be some jobs that do get affected, which have a lot of automatable tasks. And also, people have to upskill very quickly. And so that's why I've been kind of harping on a bit today about the tools, right? And I appreciate you went and did that class on ChatGPT because I think we need to all make an effort to learn the AI tools and learn how to use them. And I think the difference is because they're so accessible, we need to learn them pretty quickly as opposed to wait for a long time, right? So that's why I think in terms of what worries me is I'm worried about the short-term effects that it will have on the labor markets. But I do believe that in the medium and long term, we'll kind of figure it out. So yeah, if I had to pick two areas, autonomous weapons and then short-term disruption to labor markets, those are things that keep me up at night.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So I just add a bit of light salt here. So what I think is, I mean, in general, humans are driven by fear and love. And coincidence of it, AI, if you pronounce, Kevin, do you know AI and I is love, right? So we definitely will have fear because we have a lot of people we love our lives, right? There's a lot of that at stake. But I think when we make a conscious choice to be driven by love and defend what we love and shape the future, it's much more powerful than being driven by fear. And I must say, why did I create this series, talk about AI and future-proofing career? It's really because a lot of my clients were bringing this anxiety, like what, so time you were asking, like, what if the future just change? What if tomorrow things change, right? How do I manage that? I think end of the day, this is how we can take more agency and put more things in our hands and be part of this change and to have more and more influence in this change instead of letting things happen to us so we can be driven by love. That's what I believe.
Thank you. That's so sweet. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Then thanks for that question. I think that's really the question that was the deal behind my mind and driving this whole thing to happen. So thanks for naming it. Okay, so I think I should let Kevin go. Thanks to the registrants of the audience, and we will call it a night. Hope to stay in touch elsewhere on LinkedIn, and we are going to publish this on YouTube and podcast as well. So Future Studios, next series will be next Tuesday with the CIO.
Perfect. Thank you, Yolanda, for having me. This was really fun.
Thank you so much, Kevin. Learned a lot, and I really enjoyed the conversation.
All right. Bye-bye. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night. Bye-bye. Yeah, funny. That is a microphone.
Good. I think it's still recording, by the way.
It's what? Sorry?
I think it's still recording. Do you want to stop recording?
Sure.